Fantastic frameworks for fast feature-filled flows. My name is Evan Ponter. Today we are talking all about Salesforce flows. And specifically, I want to talk about record-triggered flows today. Salesforce is investing heavily in Flow as the go-to automation tool for all of your declarative automation needs. And Flow is going to be the answer for everything you used to do with workflow rules and process builder. So I've spent a couple years, honestly, putting together some best practices, tips, and some frameworks that really help me as I'm working with my clients to migrate all of their automation over to flows, at least on the declarative side. And I've learned a lot of lessons along the way. So I've put together this session to sort of highlight those tips and tricks that you can start using as you're doing your transition to flow for all of your declarative needs. The way I want to walk through this is by going through a couple of requirements, understanding the use case here, and then taking a look at how we would build that out in flow. So our first use case is a naming convention. And the pattern that we're solving for here is anytime a record is created or updated and you want to update a field on that same record, you can use this framework in order to solve for that. Now for this use case, this opportunity naming convention, this sales company wants to automatically have all of their opportunities include the name of the account, the close date, and the amount from that opportunity to serve as their naming convention. That way they don't have people typing in things inconsistently or trying to remember exactly how that all fits together. So we can use Flow to solve for this use case. I'm going to jump over here. I'm going to go through this slowly at first, and then for the following examples, we'll go a little bit faster once you get the hang of it. So in our flow, I've set this up as a record-triggered flow. In the start element, I'm going to choose opportunity as the object that we want to automate on. We're going to configure this trigger to run anytime a record is created or updated. Those are the two situations where we want to apply our opportunity naming convention. Now, if we jump to the bottom, this is super important. For any automation you want to run that is updating a field on the triggering record, the best way to do that is to optimize the flow for fast field updates. What that means is this flow is going to run in before save context and most efficiently assign values to the triggering record without having to commit changes to the database multiple times. So this fast field updates is relatively new. It's been out for 3 or 4 releases now, and it's really great for any use case where you're updating the triggering record. Literally any other use case you might have, you're going to probably use the actions and related records. But for these first 2 examples, I'm going to show you where we're updating the triggering record. Fast field updates is your best friend here. Now, once we have that context set, entry conditions are one of the most important ways you can help make your flows run more efficiently. Basically, these entry conditions control when your flow is going to run. And the most efficient way to have your automation run is to only run when it absolutely needs to. So by setting entry conditions, you can narrow down that window for when your automation runs to make sure it's absolutely needed, does the job it needs to do. But otherwise, if other edits are made to this record, we don't need this flow to be running constantly every time a record is saved to the database. So what we do for our entry conditions for this particular use case is we want the naming convention to be applied on brand new records or anytime one of the pieces of information changes on that record. The way we can set our entry conditions to make sure we're capturing all 4 of those situations is we can actually check the ID field for a record as it's being created in before save context. That ID has not been set yet for brand new records. So if we check it at this point in the order of execution and it is a null value, we know we're working with a brand new record, and that's when we're going to want to run this automation. The other situations we want to run this automation is when the account is changed, and we have this is changed operator right here in the entry conditions. Super useful. We also want this to run when amount is changed or the close date is changed. And I'm using this or condition requirements here to make sure I'm just checking any one of these things are true. Go ahead and launch the flow. Now, once we launch the flow, I'm going to route directly to an update records element. And I say that in quotations because what's happening here, Salesforce recently brought the update records element to before save context, but they're not actually introducing any extra DML operations here. This doesn't call an update action or an update statement. What's happening is they wanted to make this very clear that assignments you apply in before save context to the triggering record are being committed to the database. So this update records element translates to an assignment behind the scenes. If you're more familiar with Apex and how you can assign values to the triggering record in Apex, this works exactly the same way. They've locked down the options here, so the only thing you can update is the triggering record, and it functions equivalent to an assignment element. You do have the option here to set additional filter conditions. I've already narrowed down when this flow is going to run based on the entry conditions and the start element, so all I want to do is set my naming convention. And the way I do that, instead of trying to type everything here into the value little text box, you can actually use a formula resource to set the value for each field that you want to assign here, and it gives you a lot more real estate to work with. So let's take a look at this name value formula resource. First of all, you get this nice formula builder. This is pretty brand new to Flow. I think it came out in the last release. It gives you access to all of your functions, all of your operators. You can narrow down which functions you want to use, and you've always had this ability to insert resources. And the first thing I'll say is one of the resources you should be very familiar with is the $record global variables. This gives you access to values from your triggering record without having to do any extra work. There are no extra queries needed. You just have direct access to all of those values right here. Other nifty thing about this is from the $record global variable, you can traverse its relationships and get access to values from parent objects or even grandparent objects, which is what I'm going to show you here. And the key benefit about taking advantage of these features is, again, it doesn't cost you any extra SOQL queries. You don't have to use a get records element to query for information to get a field from, say, the account. So what I'm doing in my naming convention is being very careful to only traverse those relationship fields in the $record global variable when they have values. You will run into flow runtime errors if you try to traverse a relationship that is not specified. So what you can do is simply make sure the relationship you're traversing is not blank by using an if statement. So I'm saying if account ID is not blank, go ahead and traverse that relationship and give me the account name for our naming convention. Otherwise, you can put in any arbitrary text or no text that you want to do. You can handle that situation where an opportunity is not related to an account. Next up, I'm just going to concatenate some divider characters to help break up our naming convention string here. I have access to the close date from the record. I just need to convert it to text in order to have it show up in a text field. Close date is a date data type. So you do have to be very careful with your data types as you're working in formulas in the Flow engine. The last thing I'm doing here is I want to display the amount. Currency fields, currency values are just stored in the database as plain numbers. They don't have any symbols in front of them. They don't necessarily have two decimal places. So if you needed to show currency formatted the way you're used to, you will have to apply all of those formatting options yourself. You can look in the Trailblazer community for some formulas to help you out with this. The example I have here is just showing you that you have access to all of the wonderful functions and operators you're used to in the formula builder when you're working with formulas in the flow builder. So I'm able to take that amount field and format it as US dollars with 2 decimal places and a $sign in front. Now, that is the entirety of my flow canvas. I have some conditions in the start element, and I have a single element here to assign values to the triggering record. Using that formula resource to apply that naming convention, it really simplifies the canvas here. And what I want to emphasize is the less elements you have on your canvas, the more efficient your flow is going to run. So really take the time to streamline your flow canvas as much as possible. It really helps in situations where you are bulk updating records or maybe bulk creating records using data loader. The fewer things your flow canvas needs to process in bulk, the faster it's going to run. Now let's activate this version and I'll show you how it works. So I'll jump over here to one of my accounts. I'm going to go ahead and create a brand new opportunity here. I'll give it an amount. I'll put something here in the name. I'll set a close date for, and I'll set the stage. As soon as I click this save button, you'll see in the toast message that my naming convention will get applied. Right there. There you have the account name, I have the close date, I have the amount from the record. I can navigate to that brand new record, and let's say I make a change to this amount field. I meant to say $800,000, and it's gonna take me another month to close that gigantic deal. So I change the amount and I change the close date. As soon as I hit save, those updates are applied to my record. Super fast, running in that before save context, and I'm checking for brand new records and when edits are made to the record. Now, the last thing I want to show is there's really 2 ways to facilitate a requirement like this. We can allow people to manually make an update here to the name of the record, and that change will hold. So if they wanted to add some text to the end, they can do that. If we were to adjust our flow a little bit, we could have a standard field like the name field behave like a formula. So in here in this start conditions, all I would need to do is add one more check to see if the name of the record is changing. And if I set up and activate my flow like this, any attempt to edit that opportunity name will be overwritten with the naming convention you are applying here. So keep that in mind. There's a lot of different use cases where you want maybe a standard field or a pick list field to behave like a formula. You can use flow and these before save flows to facilitate that. The next requirement I want to walk through is still working with before save flows, fast field updates, but we want to conditionally update a field using a query. And there's a couple things we're going to add to the scenario here. So we need to solve for all of these requirements as we go through these examples all at the same time. So we're going to be building upon our last example, adding in these new requirements here. So the next requirement we got from the business is if an opportunity is created and the account already has an open opportunity, we want to set some text in the next step field and put a link to a record. Now, the use case is this sales company, their reps are constantly creating opportunities, which is great, but they want to help their operations team by consolidating shipments. So if a new opportunity is created on an account that already has an open opportunity, they want to put a link on that new record to the existing open opportunity to help link those things together so they can just send out one shipment at the end of the week with all the opportunity products. So we need to do a couple things here. We need to, when a brand new opportunity is created, we need to go find if there are any open opportunities on that account. That's going to require us to use a get records element to query for some data. The other thing we need to do is We only want to set that next step field if we find a result. So we're going to conditionally update that field. Let me show you how we went about solving for this. So here's the next version of my flow. Our start element is exactly the same. So we're still running this automation on opportunities when they're created or updated. In fact, we are already running this flow on brand records because we're checking to see if this ID field is null, and in before saved context, as a record's being created, the ID has not been set yet until it gets committed to the database, which happens later in the order of execution. So our start element stays exactly the same. We're going to add in some additional elements here. We have this decision to decide if we need to go find an open opportunity. The reason I do this is to protect the query so that we're not always querying for records. We only do it when we need to. Another thing I'm going to do here is, instead of just putting all of the criteria directly in this decision, I'm going to use a formula resource so that I can reference that logic in multiple places. This is one of my favorite things about working with automation in the flow builder as opposed to the legacy tools, is if you need to reference the same little bit of logic in a bunch of different places throughout your configuration, these formula resources work wonders for doing that. So let's take a look at this need to check for open opportunity resource. It's a formula. It returns a Boolean data type, meaning it's a true statement or a false statement. And all I'm doing here is, this is where I'm putting in my criteria for when I want to run that query, when I need that get records element. I want to do it for brand new records. You can use the isNew operator or isNew function in the flow formula resources. And then I just need to make sure I have all the information I need in order to run that query. So I'm making sure that query is not going to fail or give me inconsistent results. So I need to make sure this opportunity is related to an account. So I use, again, here's that $record global variable back in action. So I can make sure that the account ID is specified on the triggering record. If both of those things are true, we're going to root down the left side of this decision outcome. And we're going to this get records element, which is going to perform our query to go find an open opportunity on the account. So what I'm looking for is an opportunity record where the account ID equals the same account on our triggering record. There's that $record global variable again. And then I want to make sure it's an open opportunity, so I check to make sure that is closed equals false. I'm seeing Ben's question, is there a difference between isNew and checking the record ID to see if it's null? Those two things will give you the same result. You don't have the ability to use isNew in entry conditions, which is why I showed you the record ID is null trick. You could use the record ID is null throughout your criteria in the rest of your flow if you wanted to, and that would work the same way. Okay, so we're querying for an opportunity here. I'm going to sort those results ascending by close date for instances where there might be multiple open opportunities. And I really only need the first record. That's where operations wants to consolidate all their shipments down to. And what I'm doing here is something I think saves a lot of time and a lot of agony later. So a lot of times people will just store all the fields automatically in an automatic variable, which can work great. But what I found is, when your query doesn't return any results and you try to access a value from those results, you get a nasty flow error at runtime. So what I've been doing instead is, if I just need, say, one piece of information from the results of my query, I take that information and store it in separate variables. All I need from this query is the ID of the record. I go store that in a plain text variable. And what that does is it allows me to safely reference that text variable later on in my flow. And if it doesn't have any results in it, that's fine. It's just an empty string, and I won't get an error at runtime. If it does find a result, then I have access to my ID field, and I don't need to do any extra decisions or any fancy workarounds to try to determine if I found results or not. I can just check to see if this text variable has a value. So here, this is the entire query here for the get records element, just storing the ID of the very first open opportunity that is linked to the same account in a text variable. At the end of my flow, I route all outcomes to a single element that's going to assign values to the triggering record. And in here is where things start to get interesting. We are still solving for our naming convention from the first example. So everything is exactly the same about setting that name field. But here's my brand new requirement where I'm setting the next step field. I'm going to use a formula here to set the value of the next step field. What's happening is I'm able to solve for both requirements and sort of evaluate the criteria independently by using these formula resources. So let me show you what this next step value is doing. Cheryl's asking, what if there's more than one open opportunity? In my get records, I was sorting the results ascending by close date, and I've only selected the first record. So if there's more open opportunities, the second through the end of the list would just be ignored. I'm just pulling in that first one based on its close date. For that next step value, there's a couple things happening here. Very much want to highlight that I'm using a very simple if statement to do a lot of the work that I do in these before save flows. And the structure here is check criteria to see if you need to update this field. If so, go ahead and set it to whatever value you want. Otherwise, set that field to the value that it already has. I want to let that sink in for a second. What you end up getting here is a way to dynamically, within a single assignment element, determine if you're going to update a field's value or not. So by having this else statement say set it to the value it already has, it results in no change being made. And it gives you a really cool, crafty way to apply your automations independently against each field that you intend to update or not within a single assignment element, that update records element. So let me step through what's the criteria here for when I want to automate the value of this field. I'm reusing some logic from before. That need to check for open opportunity. That lets me know that my query ran because the decision outcome went down the left side of the path. And then I want to make sure, hey, if I have results from that query in that open opportunity ID, I know I need to automate the value in that field. So this first line here is just setting some static text. And then they wanted to put a link to the record. Utilizing that ID that I found in the get records query. And what I like to do for that is make it dynamic. I used to hard code the base URL, and then I would run into all kinds of trouble trying to deploy that from sandbox to production, have to update the URL, blah, 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 big headache. We're working here in a Trailhead playground. It has a crazy base URL with a bunch of random letters and numbers. I don't want to have to remember any of that stuff. What I've ended up doing is there's a global resource available to you, a global variable called $API. And if you look at this list, you're like, what the heck is going on here? All it really is giving you a URL for the environment you are currently logged into, which is super handy anytime you need to link to a record. I use this trick in flows. I use it in email templates. It's a great way to make sure you're always grabbing the right URL to link to a record. So we just take the left portion of one of those enterprise server URLs all the way up to and including the .com/, and then we just tack on a record ID at the end. And it works in Classic, it works in Lightning. It gives you a dynamic URL to the record that you're hoping to link to. So let me activate this version and show you how this all works. It might make a little bit more sense over here. I'm going to hop back over to this Burlington account, which has some open opportunities on it. Here's one in needs analysis qualification. I'm going to create a brand new record, and we're going to watch a bunch of different things happen here. Our naming convention should still work, and our new requirement to set this next step field should kick in as well. So as soon as I click save on this record, there's my naming convention, sets the name of the record beautifully, and then here's that next step field getting set. That query ran, it found a result, so we put some static text, and then here's my dynamic URL to the first open opportunity record on the account. I can copy that, paste it up here, and go directly to that record where I should be consolidating all the shipments. Oh, Bobby is asking, what about the slash opportunity ID is no longer in fashion? That will work sometimes. It really depends on the context. I haven't tested that for flows. I know you run into trouble trying to do that with email templates that are getting sent out. You could play with it both ways. You might still be able to use that slash here, but I'm putting this in a text field, so I kind of needed the whole URL. But if you are putting that into a URL field, you might be able to get away with just the slash record ID. Okay, we have another 10 minutes here, so let's jump to our next requirement. We've done a couple examples with the before save flow running in fast field updates optimization. Let's take a look at some requirements that involve running flows after save context for actions and related records. So this example is showing how you would create multiple records when a record is created or updated. So this sales team, they have sales managers who want to go in and mark certain accounts as a high priority. And when they do that, they want two things to happen. They want two tasks to be created, one for their sales rep to review that account today, and then they want a second task created that has them call the client with tomorrow's date on it. So anytime this customer priority field is set to high, we need to create two tasks. We're going to use our after save flows in order to solve for that requirement. So I've created a brand new flow here called account after save. In the start element, I'm running this automation on the account object, and it's only going to run anytime an account is updated. Down here, I'm checking to see if customer priority equals high and the record was updated to meet these conditions. This results in a very narrow window of when this automation is going to run. It's only when this customer priority field is changed to high. Down here at the bottom, this flow is optimized for actions and related records, which gives us access to the ability to create additional records in the system. So the first thing we're going to do is I ended up creating two record variables to house the values for the two tasks that we want to create. Part of the structure for this is working with collections. We want to minimize the number of DML statements that we have our flows executing. Instead of creating one task and then creating a second task with two separate DML statements, we can combine them all together and put them in a collection so that we can make best use of the resources available to us. These pink elements are your data elements. They are a little bit more expensive in the eyes of Salesforce, so they have limits on them. There are governor limits at play here. You can only perform so many of these elements in your flow canvas. Whereas these yellow elements are part of the logic area here. They still take time to process, but there are way fewer governor limits on those. The only one you might ever encounter would be the 2,000 records that can be or 2,000 elements that can be evaluated in a flow interview. That really only comes up if you're working with loops and you're looping over lots of records. So what I have ended up doing is I've created two record variables, one to house the values for the first task we want to create. It's a record data type. I choose the object. It's just a single, so I don't have the multiple values option checked here. I have a second task record I'm hoping to define, set up the exact same way, just called task number 2. And what I can do in an assignment element is assign values to both records, all in one assignment element. Again, we want to minimize the amount of elements on our flow canvas. So here I'm assigning all the values to task 1, the due date, who it's assigned to, priority, the subject, and I'm going to relate it back to the account that is triggering this automation. Right below that, I have all the values being assigned to task number 2. Same values, just setting the subject, and the due date is using a formula resource here to set that date to tomorrow's date. After I've assigned all the values to those two tasks independently, I add them to a collection. And here I have this tasks to create collection variable. I'll show you how that's set up. It's almost exactly the same as those single tasks. You choose record for data type, you choose the object, but I've checked off the allow multiple values option here to turn that into a collection variable. You can add both of your records to the collection variable in a single assignment. I do it after the one assigning the values to make sure all the values are assigned to each task before they get added to the collection. Sometimes these assignment elements will execute in any order they feel like, so if you want to make sure something happens before another thing, use separate assignment elements to do that. Something I've learned through the years here. Once you have both of your tasks added to your collection, you can simply call the create tasks element one time and tell it you want to pass in multiple records. And that lets you specify your record collection variable. So let's activate this version and I'll show you how this works. I'll go back over to my Burlington account. Currently the customer priority is medium. I don't have any upcoming tasks, but as the sales manager, I'm going to change this to high. Click save. Here's my two tasks that get created with the appropriate subjects and the due dates on them. Our last example we're going to walk through is how we would update multiple records in the system. So sales reps got tired of accounts that go inactive. They would have to go in and close out all of the open opportunities one at a time. Such a drag. Is there a way to automate that? He said, yes, we can do that. So anytime an account's active field is set to no, they wanted to change the stage to open opportunities to closed lost automatically. So let's take a look at how we would do that. And in here, it brings up a very hot topic of should I do this in one flow or multiple flows? And if you attend my session tomorrow, we can argue about that the entire time. I have a little bit of data that I've done some performance testing to see what the impact is of setting up automation in one flow versus multiple flows. That's tomorrow's session. Here's the teaser of me going down this path where I'm putting all of it in one flow here with a couple of decisions. So this configuration is going to solve for both of these after save requirements that we have. Still running on account when a record is updated. I'm checking two things here in my entry conditions. Is the customer priority changed or is that active field changed? If either of those things are true, I want to go ahead and launch this flow and actions and related records optimization. Then I make subsequent decisions in decision elements about what I should do. So this first decision is deciding if I need to solve for that task creation scenario that we just walked through. So if customer priority equals high and the record was updated to meet these conditions, then we're going to go down the left side. These three elements are exactly the same as before. Now, regardless if I create those tasks or I skip it, I'm coming down here to my next decision. This canvas looks a lot like what you probably have looked at in Process Builder, where you decide if you're going to execute the actions on a row, and at the end of that row, you evaluate the next criteria. That's exactly the same structure that I have set up here. This second decision is checking, do I need to close the opportunities by checking to see if that active field got set to no and the triggering record was updated to meet those conditions. If that is true, I'm going to root down the left side of the outcomes, and I'm going to go to this update opportunities element. And what I want to emphasize here is just how much power is packed into this update records element when you are using this specify conditions option here. It's actually doing about 5 things for you, so you don't have to facilitate that in your flow canvas. First thing it's going to do is allow you to specify conditions to query for a bunch of records, one or more. So I'm going to look for opportunities that are related to the triggering account, and I'm going to make sure that is closed equals false. I'm looking for open opportunities related to this account. Then it lets you loop through all of the results, assign new values to any of the fields. Here I'm setting the stage to closed, lost. Then it's going to put all those in a collection for you and then commit all those changes to the database in a single operation. Really powerful stuff. But I want to really emphasize, anytime you're using specify conditions to identify records and set fields individually, it is going to run a query. So what you shouldn't do is just set, update this record, and I already have the ID in your flow. If you already have the ID, you don't need to query for it. So I'll show you in the next example how we would facilitate that. For this requirement, though, it works great because we don't have the IDs of the opportunities we need to update. It could be a collection of records, and I don't want to have to loop through them individually. So anytime you're setting the value of all your results to the same value across all the records, this update records element works fantastic. So I'll activate this version and show you what happens when I go back to my Burlington account. It has a bunch of open opportunities. It has these tasks here. I can set active to no. It's going to loop through all those open opportunities and change them to close lost. No more manual updates that need to happen there. I did want to show you the last configuration here. If you needed to individually decide if you want to update your results, you have to split out the 5 things that are happening in that update records element. So here I have the query happening at first. Here's the loop. You can assign new values. And here, by using formulas, you can reference the current record you're looping through and make decisions about what stage you want to set. Again, using simple if statements in order to apply a little bit of logic there. Once you have the values you need on each record, you add them to a collection. This is inside the loop here. Put it all in an opportunities to update collection. Once you've processed all the records, then outside of your loop, you're going to update all of those records at the same time, this time using a record collection variable. So a couple different ways to do that depending on what your requirements are, but wanted to show how this framework sort of scales. In our last few minutes here, I do want to do a quick recap. So here's everything we talked about with before save flows optimized for fast field updates. I'm a very big proponent of using entry conditions. You can check the ID of the record here to see if it's a brand new record. There is the new option to use formulas to set your entry conditions. That's new as of summer 22. Salesforce has been very clear that you might suffer from performance if you're putting some complicated formulas in your entry conditions. So I'm still weary to use that, and I will keep you updated if I find out more about that. I like to protect queries in before save flows using a decision so they only execute when absolutely needed. When I query for records and I only need a couple pieces of information, store them in variables so that you can safely reference them later on. I consolidate all of my assignments to the triggering record into a single update records element Tomorrow's session gets into more about why that is beneficial, and then I use formula resources to conditionally set the values of each field in that single update records element. Lastly, flows optimized for actions and related records. These are running in after-safe context. Again, big fan of entry conditions. If you are performing multiple actions in your flow, you want to protect them using decisions. So you only go down the paths that you need to go. Consolidate your database operations using collections to gather up all the records you're hoping to either create or update, put them in a collection, and then use that expensive element just one time. Lastly, if you're going to update a bunch of records and set the same value on all the results, you can take advantage of the update records element. Otherwise, be very mindful to use your query, loop through your results, add everything to a collection, and then don't use the specify conditions option if you already have the IDs of the records you're hoping to update. Thank you so much. You can stay in touch with me on Twitter at RealEvanPonter. I'm also on LinkedIn. You'll find my face there. It's in/etponter, and then my email is evan@pontersolutions.com. Thank you so much for your attention today. I hope you enjoy the rest of today's Dreamin events, and tomorrow I'll be back again with a look at performance testing, different combinations of flows and how they do the same thing, but they might take different amounts of time to run. Thanks so much.